Welcome in, everybody, to Grind Time, powered by Full Time Fantasy and the FFWC. We are in episode 3 of Meet the Players, and I am proud to have Chad Schroeder join me today. Chad is arguably the best player in fantasy football right now. He's been playing fantasy football seriously for about 15 years. He has netted around $2.3 million in fantasy football. He's the only player in the industry who has won the hat trick. That is the NFFC Primetime. He's won twice. He's got FFWC main event and as well as the FFPC main event. That is quite the impressive hat trick there. He manages about 300 season-long teams roughly annually, and his portfolio this year in 2022 is an impressive $600,000 invested into the season. Chad, welcome to the show. I am honored to have you on, and I'm excited to jump into some of these questions.
Good to be here. Little break from the basketball draft.
So August 1st is what we call now Chad Schroeder Day. Bobby Bonilla has his day. Chad Schroeder now gets August 1st. Because you don't join drafts until August 1st. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And even then, I kind of take it easy the first few days. It took me a long time to even sign up on my teams, but I finally had that almost done.
What's the hard date? Like, I remember there was a miscommunication. You were in the draft on the 31st. We, were notified you were moved out of the draft. Is there a reason why there's a hard date of August 1st?
No, just mentally, that's when I felt like it was a good time to gear up. It helps contain myself from having more teams than I already do. If I was drafting all football guys and all that all summer and your online championship here, I would add even more burden on Wednesdays than I already have, and don't need that. And also, I found that just for me, the competition in those early leagues is fierce. And the waiver wires are fierce, and I don't quite pay attention to the news all year round well enough to gain a huge ADP bump edge type thing. So it just was not profitable and added more work. And I also maybe got some biases in my mind on players too soon, and it's hard no matter who you are to get off some of those things. So I'm able to kind of go in the fresh mind and just kind of react to the things that are going on here the last 40 days before the last drafts.
Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely makes sense. I definitely have biases with players as we start hearing news in camp and seeing things, and I can see how that can sway my judgment. That's typically like why I like to go back and adjust projections again, like a second or third time. It kind of helps reset those biases in my head, and I get back on a player that I maybe was off of based on news or so projections. I feel like is a reset for me, but not everyone's doing those. Let's set football aside for a minute. Where are you originally from, and where do you currently live?
I currently live in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm originally from a town of about 4,000 in central Nebraska, Aurora, Nebraska. Grew up there my whole life, and then I went to school in Lincoln at the university, and then moved to Omaha after that.
And you can live anywhere in the world. I mean, you're exceptional at fantasy football. We just talked about how much you've netted in fantasy football. Why do you choose to live in Nebraska?
That's a good question. Sometimes I wonder if I should be when it's blistering hot in the summer and terrible in the winter. But I have all my family here. My parents are close. My sister that I'm close to is 5 minutes away. So that's a lot of it. But we'll see as time goes on. I might consider moving.
Okay, and we talked off air. I know you've been pretty heavily involved inside the legislation in the fantasy football world in Nebraska. Can you kind of walk me through your involvement in that and what you helped pass or maybe maintain or any regulations, or kind of walk me through what happened there?
When I went and testified and talked to some legislators, I did not. I was kind of walking a tightrope because the bills were that were presented were basically drawn by FanDuel and DraftKings back then, and they were trying to kind of bully the full season companies, I felt like. And so from that standpoint, I was against the laws as written. I was trying to get them to work with me to write some better ones, but you know how the lobbyists and politics all work. But then it turned into there's a bunch of anti-gambling people there. Nebraska is a pretty conservative state. And so I was having to defend fantasy sports in general as a game of skill, yet try to get my point across to the legislators that this bill is not a good one as presented. So I went neutral because I found out that if you go neutral, you get to go last. And then I could kind of see which side I needed to play harder on.
Nice.
And I had to play harder on the fact that fantasy sports is a game of skill, but then I was able to follow up, and it still has not passed in Nebraska, which is a good thing because I don't think the bill's good for full season companies, and that's what I care about the most. So,
okay. And are you currently employed right now? Or is fantasy football your full-time job, or are you working still on the side?
No, I haven't worked a normal job per se since 2000. I've been a pro sports gambler and in fantasy sports ever since then. I used to make a really good living back in the offshore gambling heyday before they shut that down around 2008 when poker got shut down online.
I remember that.
And so I was the guy betting all kinds of props back before everybody's now doing it, and making a lot of money on prop betting back then. It was very inefficient markets.
And so what was your day job prior to retiring?
I worked at Ameritrade as sort of a mid-manager for a few years, and then when the market crashed in 2000, they laid a lot of the mid-management off, myself included, and then so I didn't have much at all at that point, and so I slowly started getting into gambling, and then a couple of years later or so, I had huge bets on the Marlins, the Bartman year to win the National League at 125-1 and the World Series at 250-1. And that kind of launched my bankroll. And then I became pretty dangerous after that.
Great. We'll come back to the bankroll question. I know definitely want to touch base on the bankroll and how it happened. And definitely want to get more details on that for players who are just getting started as well. So being from the investment world, what's the better investment for the next 5 years, Amazon or Tesla?
I don't know. Most of my money, unfortunately, has been in the crypto space. That hasn't worked out too well lately.
Yeah.
That's why I'm playing it big again in fantasy, hoping to make some money back.
So, okay, draft is finished. What's your beverage of choice? Beer, wine, whiskey, something else?
What's it got to do with the draft being finished? No, I'll have Jack and Diet or something like that sometimes. But
I was playing golf with this old guy about maybe a month ago, and he was in his like late 70s, maybe early 80s, and he said he goes to a restaurant. Every time he goes to a restaurant, he asks them, "Hey, can I get a Diet Dr. Pepper?" And most places don't have Diet Dr. Pepper, and they tell him, "Sir, sorry, we don't have Diet Dr. Pepper." He says, "Okay, give me Crown Royal and Coke then." So ever since that, I just crack up. I was like, I'm gonna start using that line, but I'm gonna order a different beverage. But it's funny to see them. Oh, we don't have that. Just such a change. Any hobbies outside of fantasy football and sports betting, of course?
I like watching I don't have kids of my own, so I like watching my nephew's baseball games and stuff. And I actually coached his 3-on-3 summer league team. We just got done a couple weeks ago. So I enjoy doing that. Spend a lot of time at a couple different rivers, cabins and stuff quite a bit. Enjoy concerts and baseball games and stuff. I'm a big Husker fan, especially basketball. It's miserable, but so yeah, just sports and concerts and cabin time and watching games.
Okay, great. A lot of family time. Sounds like you said you got a bunch of family in Nebraska. It's nice to have family close. I don't have family even remotely close to us. We got to travel like 6 to 8 hours minimum to get to somebody. So I bet it's nice to be able to see your family that close. I want to, before we hop into more of my questions, let's ask a couple questions from the chat. Let me see here. Stats Guru wants to know, how much attention do you pay to bye weeks during drafts?
0.
Okay. And do you avoid team kicker and defense as a general rule during the draft?
Well, I mean, some formats this early, if you don't have to take those positions, I don't usually take them, and I'll pick them up before the first waiver run. But some places you do have to take them, and if you do have to take them, then I sometimes will take try to sneak in the right time to get a reasonable one to cut down my fab work a little bit. But usually it doesn't end up working that way. I usually end up streaming. So,
couple of questions from Scott here. What is the largest private money league you've ever been invited to?
I've played in some $50,000 auction, 14 team auctions before.
That's pretty crazy. And I'm assuming you won.
I had pretty good success in those. Not invited anymore.
I'm not. He's kicked out. He won. Is it true that you and other world champions are college frat brothers?
Yeah, Darren Summer and I were fraternity brothers in Lincoln.
That's awesome.
He's a couple years younger than I am.
That's pretty.
He lives in Omaha also. So.
And then one more question from the chat, and then we'll hop into some of my questions and come back to the chat. Is there something you'd consider a mortal sin in fantasy football?
A mortal sin.
Like for me, it would be like dropping players going into like the playoffs because you didn't make the playoffs.
Say that again, Billy.
Like for me, it'd be like somebody dropping a player going in, like as the shootout schedule is about to happen because they didn't make the playoffs. Like to me, that's like a mortal sin. Like at least they get lost.
I think he's saying mortal, not moral. Which might be different. I'm not exactly sure where he's going, but I might be talking like strategically. And every draft is different, and I'll use some bold strategies. So I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but typically it's not a great idea to have an elite quarterback and an elite tight end in formats where you only really are wanting to ever use one of each.
I like that rule.
FFPC might be a little different with the premium format, but like FFWC, it's unlikely you would see me draft an elite quarterback and an elite tight end. I try to save just one or the other.
Makes sense. You don't want to invest too much capital at both positions when they're just onesies, correct?
Yeah, fill in the positions where you need more depth.
Okay. So let's talk about your cheat sheet. And you don't need to go into details here, but do you create your own rankings? I'm assuming you create your own cheat sheet. How does that process work for you? When do you typically start building that sheet?
It starts off as like on August 1st as sort of like a combined ADP throughout the different formats that I play. And I basically just use I don't have an overall list per se. I just list all the quarterbacks in order of kind of how they're going, and same with the other positions. And then as time goes on and I start liking players or disliking players, I'll move them up and down accordingly. I also see who my peers that I respect are taken that maybe I was overlooking, or vice versa. If I'm ending up with a guy a lot and nobody I respect has ever taken them, I'll manually bump them down a little bit. So it kind of takes a life of its own, but it's like it's generally an ADP list that's got some twists is what I use. It allows me to I don't highlight tiers on it because the tiers are a little different for each format, but mentally, after doing some drafts at each place, I kind of developed tiers in my own mind and know where I think I should gravitate to a different position, or stay. Like if the receivers tier kind of closes up, then I'll look at it, time to take a running back maybe, or FFPC. If it's kind of a dead spot, that's when I'll try to look to see if a tight end makes sense. But yeah, I think doing it the way I do it, it helps me sort of mentally tier things without highlighting tiers on my sheet.
And while you're building teams with that philosophy, do you typically have going into a draft with maybe a draft approach that you want to for that given draft? Is if you were do you favor like hero running back, zero running back? I mean, which is your preferred method? And I know that you draft so many of these that you're doing, a wide range of diversification when you're creating your portfolio. But if Chad Schroeder started over today and you only had X amount of leagues, which way do you lean when constructing rosters?
I would say like the first 3 rounds, I sort of have a pecking order in my mind, like which player makes more sense, and I'll pretty much stick to that pecking order, even if it strays me to start out 3 wides. Or the only thing that it would be unusual for me to do is start with 3 running backs. I don't like to do that, but it does happen sometimes, and this year it might happen a little bit more than I'm accustomed to.
Yeah, the way the board's been falling. Yeah, the board's been falling that way for sure this year, especially in best ball. You've been able to see some pretty unique rosters with 3 running back starts. So not normally my forte either, but I have actually liked some of the teams that have started that way, and it's. I agree with you. I've definitely have more than I'm usually accustomed to from that type of start.
Best balls, I do not mind starting 3 running backs as much as I do in formats like the FFWC, where you have to start 3 wide receivers at all times, and you do in those too, but you don't have to pick when they all play. So some of those later round guys that are going to score you points, and you don't have to try to predict when it's going to happen. But in the FFWC type format, when you have to start 3 wides, it's tough to start 3 running backs in a row and feel good about things.
And you talked about not having biases towards players, and one of the reasons why you liked drafting come August 1st. Do you have maybe an entire offense? Is there ever a time where you're fading entire offense, or because you're drafting so much volume, is it just too risky of a play?
I don't really think of it that way. I'm basically looking at each player, and I tend to trust the market to have the ADPs sort of in a decent spot when I start drafting, and then start going from there and seeing what I'm comfortable doing. And I usually don't do all that well in my early goes at it, as you probably saw the other night in the FFWC main event. But the main thing is that I get up to speed, by August 25th or so, when the heavy money leagues start rolling around.
I was actually going to ask you, how long does it take for you to get into a rhythm? I know, like myself drafting, it takes me a while as well. I could assume you're doing so much volume between August and September that pace probably picks up pretty quickly. So you think about a couple weeks for you to get into a solid rhythm?
Hopefully not that long, but so far I've been doing almost all best balls. So I'll have to start shifting into the other formats here pretty soon, and then it'll be another little learning curve when I start doing that. But those FFWC main events are good learning experiences for sure.
And just briefly, let's just touch upon like roster construction, since we were talking about roster construction a bit ago. How do you differentiate your best ball lineups from, say, an FFWC World Championship? Like, how much is your strategy changing in regards to that redraft tournament versus best ball?
Depending on how many teams are in that particular best ball contest, typically there's a lot. So I probably don't force the stacks quite as much as some people do, but I do like to try to have one pass catcher with my quarterbacks when I can. The exception maybe being if I have a running quarterback like a Hertz or Lance. I don't think it's quite as important, but even then, it's pretty easy to try to get a Goddard or something with Hertz. Lance is a little trickier, and I'm fine going naked, but I'd like at least one of my two quarterbacks, or if I have bad quarterbacks, three, I'd like to have one or two pass catchers with at least one of my quarterbacks.
Do you think people are over focusing on like the week 17 correlation that we hear probably daily basis on Twitter?
Probably not. You're going to have things stacked up to win those huge tournaments. I don't think it's as important in the redraft format, but last year it obviously was, because if you didn't have Burrow and Chase, you probably weren't taking down a tournament. So, but I think that over a 3-week race, it tends to be a little less important to, and I think people might overplay the week 17 stack in those 3-week races. Like, although you do have the stack for the whole time, but people tend to look at the matchups for week 17 only, I think, and they 15 and 16 matter just as much. So.
Exactly. There was this, I think off the top of my head, I think it was like the Jets and the Lions and I forget, the Bears, I think, were the other team. And it's like those three teams were like playing each other those weeks 15, 16, 17. You're able to hit on all 3 weeks, where everyone was so focused on that last week. It was making those other ones pretty lucrative inside drafts, and they were slipping in the early drafts. Now they're kind of catching up to ADP, but let's go back to we have a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between listener questions and the questions that I'm going to be asking today. Jack Kolschlein, who's new to the FFWC, has been drafting daily now. He's another volume drafter. He says, on a typical team, how many players that you drafted do you finish with? How many spots are you actively churning?
I play in a lot of different formats, but let's assume like FFWC, where you have a 20-man roster. I would say, for whatever one reason or another, I bet you 9 or 10 don't end up on my team at the end of the year.
Okay. Is there a favorite team that you've ever drafted that stuck in your mind?
Not really. I mean, I had it would be an easy one if I didn't have a horrible beat and won $1 million the first year I played when there was this fantasy football open championship. I had just a deadly team, but I ended up having a bad beat on Sunday night and got second, but D'Angelo just went nuts and hurt me, and he was actually on my bench. That's how good my team was. But my NFFC primetime, the first time I won it, and that was the best team I ever had playing. So that one kind of stands out.
Okay. This one is more of a comment, he says, than a question, but I've sat next to Chad drafting live in Vegas. He was also doing an online main event draft at the same time. The dude does not see names. He just sees matrix code. Any truth to that to you?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I don't go to Vegas anymore. kind of felt like a prick when I couldn't really sometimes talk to people very much. And people didn't want to come say hi because they could tell I was busy. So it just got to the point where I can be a lot more efficient in my office and doing 3 or 4 at a time much easier. And there will come a day, hopefully in the near future, where I back way down and just play the high dollar leagues and a few main events here and there. And then I'll start going back out to Vegas again.
Okay. And one more question from the chat, and then we'll hop over to my questions again. How do you have the time to manage all the leagues?
I don't, but just do the best I can.
Do you think any fall by the wayside, or are some neglected maybe once you start getting the season, maybe based on record, or how do you pick and choose?
I try to get to them all. I do have a good person helping me this year. He's good at following instructions, and he can do things real quickly. So he's going to co-manage, and he'll draft some teams for me as well. I think we'll be in pretty good shape. I do plan to get going a lot earlier this year. In the past, I've basically started this on Wednesday morning, and I'm going to try to get a lot more done on Monday and Tuesday, and get the kickers and defenses out of the way on Monday, and kind of my smaller teams out of the way on Tuesday. But as we go on, there's teams that are kind of become dead, and I'll just kind of clean those up on the weekend waiver run, and not if I'm up against it time-wise.
Okay. What are the differences in your strategy for volume versus someone maybe doing a handful of drafts?
It's a lot different, because, like for instance, if you're just doing a few drafts, I think if you're doing a few drafts, you need to have fun with the teams that you're drafting. You're probably doing it more for fun than you are necessarily to expect to take down a big contest. I mean, you're obviously going to try, and you're not going to expect to lose, but I think you should enjoy it and get players that you like. Like, for instance, just bringing up a name like, say, David Montgomery. You are not too fond of him. There's no sense in taking a guy like that if you only have 2 or 3 teams. Take guys that you like and are going to enjoy rooting for, and shoot your shots, and you have to maybe bump up guys a little bit that you like. Whereas if you're doing a whole lot of teams, the players that you like will fall to you naturally, and you don't have to press the issue.
Okay, I like that idea. Is there a certain position maybe that you prefer to draft from, or do you think any advantage to any particular spot, or do you, being a volume drafter, you don't mind about the spot and you're just going to naturally just pick from where you're at?
I haven't done enough redrafts to know yet what the sweet spots are. I need to figure it out pretty soon before the formats roll around where you have some say in your draft position. But typically, if it's not third round reversal, I generally over the years have liked to go at the front. Seems to be better, but there is something to be said about being in the middle, the way I draft, because I'm a value-based drafter.
Whatever falls.
You're able to clean up the things that are falling more easily, and you're also not susceptible to position runs. If you're at the end, sometimes you have to reach a position, a quarterback or tight end, potentially up a half to 3/4 of a round or more. And it's hard to know when you should do that or not. If you're in the middle, you're kind of protected in that way.
Are there a certain percent of players that you don't like to draft over? Like maybe for me, I don't like to take over like 23% of one player in round one. Do you set any like hard limits to yourself?
No, I don't keep track, but if I do notice that I'm getting a guy a lot that's It tells me that my sheet's probably a little bit off. So I'll pass on him a couple times in a row at least to make sure that I have him in the right spot on my sheet and make sure that I couldn't be acquiring this guy, a half round later than where I have him right now. So if I'll do that type of stuff, and then when you get later on in the draft, there's certain handcuff running backs that I'll prefer over others, and I'll just keep tending to take the same ones. I don't care if I have them a bunch of times if I'm pretty confident that they're a better handcuff than the other guy.
Okay, one more question for preseason, and then we'll go back to the questions in the chat. Does preseason affect how you rate or value player when you see them in drafts?
Yeah, I was talking to Nelson about this the other day. It's gotten me in trouble more than it's helped in recent years. So you really need to be careful. There's a few things. One, even the best content provider around, in my opinion, is Dwayne McFarland, and even he'll be tweeting out this stuff. Well, this guy in his 2 series, he was out there 80% of the snaps, and he was playing this role. But sometimes that is not a good way to look at things, because the teams oftentimes are going to want their running backs to get reps in all facets of the game, and they'll get them all out of the way at one time since he's only playing a series or 2, and then they'll move on to the next guy. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be their down back when the season rolls around, or the short yardage goal line back if he happens to get a touchdown from the one. So that stuff you need to be real careful with. And then also just don't overreact. And it really got me in trouble last year with Laviska Shenault. It led me to take him over Chase almost every time. And that was a very, very expensive move. I had a great year, but it would have been legendary if I balanced that out better. It looked like I thought he could lead the league in catches last year by what I saw in the preseason. Then another thing that comes to mind is Trey Burton, maybe 4 or 5 years ago for the Bears, comes out and gets 7 targets, and they were designing, scheming things for him. And then the regular season rolls around and that didn't happen at all. So just be careful about overreacting to things, and watch the games to watch the talent and not much else. Don't assume roles are going to be what they look like they are. And just because guys score a long touchdown pass doesn't mean much. So just watch the talent and don't get carried away, and don't watch what you're hoping happens. Too many people seem to watch the games and they like a player all along through draft season, so they're looking to validate it and make excuses when it's not going his way. Have an open mind to it, but don't get married to things. Those are 2 great examples mistakes I made, having Burton a lot and Shenault a ton last year. So just be careful with it, but it can be valuable. You just got to be smart about it.
I call it getting Amir Abdullah. Yeah, I remember the year that preseason game where he broke off that run. He looked like a mini Barry Sanders, and that was the highlight of his career.
Not former Husker. There aren't too many these days in the
NFL. Couple questions here. This one's funny. Taking your 5th wide receiver for your 2nd running back?
Oh my, here we go. That's funny. There's many times when it's proper to take a 5th wide receiver before your 2nd running back. I'll just leave it at that. And there's times when it also even calls to take your 5th wide receiver before you have any running backs.
I'd agree with all those statements. I was just following the thread. I was cracking up. I'm just laughing in the background, hiding in the shadows. What is more important, the draft or fab?
Draft.
Okay. And what percent would you say is luck versus skill?
That's a hard question. I kind of equate a I kind of equate it to a poker tournament, where over time the better players are going to win the most money. But in a given poker tournament, there's a lot of luck involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question from here, and then we'll hop back into the questions. Do you like DoorDash?
Um, Omaha's got restaurants all over the place, so um, there's ones that are close. So I usually don't like spending the extra money, and I'll just go to the place and get it.
Okay. Back to we covered preseason. Let's walk through season. So walk me through your typical week. You kind of touched base on it earlier. You like to this year. You said you're going to move your kickers and defenses to Monday or Tuesdays. But walk me through your week. When do you typically start waivers? How many hours a week are you doing waivers? And do you typically create like the same bid groups and adjust them throughout all your leagues, or how does that process work?
So last year, or in the years past, I was usually just exhausted on Monday. And as the season goes on, I get more and more exhausted because my brain's doing a lot of thinking. And I'm not playing DFS this year either. So that'll be one less thing to focus on. I'm going to or very little at least. I'm going to try to embrace the chaos of the free agency and try to somehow make my brain enjoy it, but I don't know if that's possible. But I usually am get started on Tuesday night, but all day Tuesday, I'm usually go through and do an equity report and find out where I stand. I basically assume that if I'm in the playoffs, I have a 25% chance of winning first place if there's 4 teams in it and things like that. And it takes a long time, and I'm going to scrap that this year. It's nice to know where I stand, but it's more important that I'm using the time to get my teams better. So I'm going to scrap that part until we get to the playoffs and there's less fab. And then Wednesdays, I usually get up as early as possible, and I'm usually up until about 2 a.m. So it's like a 20-hour day, and then get up Thursday and I have more fab to do in some other leagues, and then start setting my lineups all on Thursday afternoon. And then last year I took Friday off and went to high school football games and stuff like that. I prefer it when fab was all done on Friday night so I can enjoy Saturday and go to Husker games and stuff. But unfortunately, it looks like this is here to stay. So last year I would typically be doing fab from about 10 in the morning Saturday until about 9 in the morning the next day, like 23 hours in a row, making sure they're all cleaned up perfectly.
So safe to say you're not leaving the house.
That's fair assessment. And then setting lineups, and then I'm exhausted and slept a lot on Monday. But this year I'm going to try to use my partner to handle some of that stuff. So hopefully I'm not up until doing fab all night on Saturday and night, Sunday morning. Do
you have paid interns?
This year I have I gave my friend a 10% free roll. He's owned part of my teams in the past. And then we have a little different arrangement on the teams he's running under his name. But generally speaking, he has a 10% free roll of my portfolio, which is, he's pretty happy with that deal because it gives him about $60,000 worth of teams. And I couldn't do the volume without him. So I think it's a good deal for me too. So.
Okay. Where would you want people to submit applications for your internship? I'm just kidding.
Well, it's very possible after 1 week of this nonsense, I'll be tweeting out if anybody's interested. Hit me up.
Speaking of Fab, what's your belief on Fab? Are you a saver? Do you spend early? I think I know the answer, but I want you to tell the people.
I I tend to save my money. I don't think I know enough to identify holes in my teams. And now last year, Elijah Mitchell comes up the very first week, and I unfortunately was taking like an RB2 that I thought I could get by with, and it was too early in the season to know that they weren't going to be any good yet, like Gaskin or Mike Davis type of player. So I thought I would be okay, and so I wasn't in on Mitchell. I defended him and got him a couple times, but I didn't get him. I usually save my money, and I've had good success controlling the waivers down the stretch a lot of times. That's led to my success. Like the year when I won the FFWC, there was some late news that very last Friday of Fab involving, I believe it was Kareem Hunt getting suspended or something. And so I had a Damian Williams on that last run everywhere, and he just went crazy the rest of the season and made me a lot of money. So I like to control the bidding at the end if possible, but but I will say teams that are falling down after 3 or 4 weeks and need a boost, then I'll be much more aggressive on those teams if there's a player that can help. It doesn't matter how much money you have left if you are out of the contention when the end of the season gets here.
Snake wants to know how the hell you win so many waiver wire claims by $1.
I have some. I know one way, but I'm not going to tell anybody it.
That's fine.
There's some common things that people do regarding bid amounts that I know about, and so I'm able to take advantage of that. But
patterns.
I do have a pretty good, pretty keen sense of I'm in the right ballpark a lot when I want a guy. Pretty bad of where I need to be. It's a pretty good skill of mine, and it should be, as many fabs as I've done. So,
this is actually a great question. In a world championship, what percentage of your draft strategy do you use towards safety versus upside in the first 6 to 8 rounds?
Yeah, that should be a good question. I don't have a very good answer. I just basically have a pecking order of players, and if I end up with guys that are mostly upside, so be it. If I end up with, like the other night in the FFWC draft, I ended up with kind of an older veteran team, maybe a little bit too much, but I don't really think about it while I'm drafting. I just try to take the best play at the time, and it led me to an old team that probably won't fare too well in that draft. But
it was like getting vanilla at the ice cream store.
Yeah, it was.
What's maybe 1 or 2 mistakes that you see managers make in season? Maybe new managers or even veterans.
I don't have time to look at other. Are you talking draft or in season? Did you say in season?
Could be either or. Yeah.
Yeah, they just. What I touched on earlier, taking a great quarterback and a great tight end, it's tough to do that. You have to have good skill to be able to do that and get away with it. And some teams wind up with like 4 running backs after 6 picks when you can only put 3 running backs possibly in some formats, and that's not a great idea. In season, people get too cute on their lineup decisions sometimes. People like to overdo playing the matchup versus your talent, in my opinion. So finding the right balance between those two things is a mistake some people make. Being a little bit complacent on on just leaving the same defense in there, regardless of who they're playing. If you're playing against Brady or Aaron Rodgers, just find another defense for that week, even if you have to hold two for, not keeping, and even kicker. If you look at the forecast and like on that, I had a lot of Bass and Folk kicking in that disaster of a weather situation that was unfolding in Buffalo. I played against a lot of the teams that ended up still having those kickers in there because they didn't plan ahead. And I dropped those kickers every time on Saturday Fab and got a kicker that's going to be in better conditions. So just the little things, don't get lazy, and make sure you're addressing kicker, defense, everything. That's about it.
Okay. Let's talk about bankroll management. You said that you hit early on a bet in the World Series bet that helped kind of catapult you. Prior to that, what was like your first season? What did it look like, and how much did you play with? How much did you dedicate percentage wise of your bankroll to fantasy football?
My first year of gambling or first year of fantasy football?
Let's keep it fantasy football.
Fantasy football, it was never an issue. I had plenty of money by the time I played, so I don't consider myself to have a bankroll per se.
Okay.
By the time I started playing fantasy football, I was just using it to supplement my sports betting income after they shut down a lot of the offshore industry. And I had enough money that I could, back then, people thought I was nuts for playing 20 teams, so it wasn't going to get to the price levels that were going to affect me much if it didn't go well.
So if you were new today, what would you say is a good starting bankroll for someone looking to dip their toes in high stakes?
That's hard to say, because what I do know is that the smaller the buy-ins around the industry, the lower the payout percentages are. So it's hard from that standpoint to get going if you don't have money. One way to get around that is to partner up with somebody, but there's complications with that too. So I don't really have a good answer. I'm just thankful that I didn't have to worry about that, because I think that would be very hard to get into this industry. I wouldn't recommend playing beyond your means and use it as fun unless you are fortunate enough to have some money to get to play a little bit comfortably. Don't let it bog you down and get overextended. It's not easy, and it gets harder every year with all the information out there.
Yeah, it does seem like those competitive edges now are becoming less and less annually. The information that's readily available on Twitter and fantasy sites, it is getting more and more competitive annually, it seems like. I know for me, for this question for people, I started the bankroll. I think my very first year I entered with, I think it was like $1,000. And, I won, I think 2 out of 3 I entered, and I was able to roll that over and then enter like $4,000, and then rolled it over again and was into, $8,000. And then next thing you know, it was 10, 15, 20. And I just kept rolling it over, and probably unwise of me not to set a percentage, but I just kept saying, hey, let's just double down. Let's just double down. And just kept doubling down and got to a point where I was able to kind of play more volume. And then, like you recommended, partnered with Dave. And now we're able to do, a lot more volume in terms of buy-ins for our portfolio. And so that's how I managed my bankroll and becoming able to be more involved in bigger money leagues like our, Top Gun here at FFWC, the 10K leagues or the 5K or whatever it may be. It was just building that slowly. But I agree with you 100%. Don't overstep your boundaries. Do what's going to be comfortable for you. As if you lost all that money tomorrow, are you comfortable losing that money? That's the question you have to ask yourself. And if the answer is no, don't enter that money.
Yeah.
Couple questions here from the chat, and then we got a couple more on my side. Let's see here. Do you think the high stakes industry will ever embrace Superflex?
It seems like it's trending in that direction. I don't know. There's more super flex things out there than I've ever seen this year. So I think it's happening. I don't know that you ever see like a super high dollar event with it or not. I mean, I don't have any idea. I just worry about what I can control, and if there is, then I'll learn to play it. So.
From Roy here, our commissioner, is there anything about the FFWC that you like more than other fantasy companies out there?
Yeah, there definitely are. There's things about every company I like more than the other companies, but a couple things about FFWC that I like is it is the 11-man lineup. It can really help separate the cream from the quality teams from the crappy teams. It's very challenging when those 6-team bye weeks hit, and how you can navigate through it. It makes a big difference. Sometimes I also like how their defensive scoring is very low scoring. I don't like contests that have high scoring defensive systems in place. I like this. In some ways, I like the standard scoring where you don't have premium this or that, and elevated quarterback scoring for touchdown passes. But with that comes maybe more cooker cutter type drafts too. So that might be one negative. But I generally like the 11-man. That's my favorite thing about it. And the it's also fun playing against these guys and these, because they're the hardest ones, in my opinion, of any place to play at.
Switching gears, over under on the Jets 5.5. You take the over under on Jets wins 5.5.
Probably over.
Okay. How about Patriots 8.5?
Probably over.
And Rams 10.5.
Probably under.
Okay.
But I haven't really, those are just off the cuff. I haven't thought about that at all.
Question from Trevor. What do you do to get this to still be fun and not feel like work is everywhere and you don't enjoy it?
It's not fun really, until about week 14 gets here. Then it's or 15 now, I guess.
Because with no more fab.
Yeah, but
fab ends, it's fun again.
Yeah, it's not a whole lot of fun. Best ball has been fun to draft those because you're just drafting and knowing you don't have to worry about it. So I'm doing more of those this year.
I call them the one night stand of football. You draft them and forget about them.
Yeah. So that's one fun thing, because while you're doing it, you're not thinking, "Ah, damn, I got to deal with this mess later." But that time will come here in a few days. So.
This is another funny question from Scott. How mad are you going to get when you see Ayuk go for 30 and your intern benched Ayuk for Sky Moore? What's the penalty? Lashes, fine, or the timeout?
No, I mean, he'll be able to ask me a peck, you like this guy or this guy, and I'll be able to tell him once, and he's smart enough to remember. And then he also knows what the transitive property is. So if I like this guy more than this guy, he's pretty smart. So I think he'll kind of figure out my pecking order. And what I do know is that he'll have the lineups he sets they'll be reasonable decisions. I'm not going to haggle over the close ones, but I'll set the most important high dollar teams myself. And if he makes a mistake, so be it. I know I would make many more if I didn't have him helping me on Sunday mornings. So
I'm going to do one more question, then I'm going to ask you a little bit about your reflection process. How did you pick the name Cocktails and Dreams?
I have no idea, to be honest, how that turned about. It definitely wasn't from the movie. cocktail. I don't really have an answer. I just went with it and had good success, so it stuck.
All right, last couple questions, and I'll let you get out of here. You probably got drafts building up in the background. But what is your reflection process? So season ended. Let's say it ended today. What does Chad do once the season ends, and how do you set yourself up? Do you reflect on your teams? Do you go back and look at maybe things you did well, things that you didn't do well? What's that reflection process look like?
I don't really have one. I'm usually so exhausted when it ends. I just go into hibernation for a long time. Like last year, first year, I didn't play playoff contests even. I was so drained. Um, so usually a lot of sleep and a lot of catching up on binge watching stuff. But I don't reflect on much. I mean, naturally, I couldn't help but think back to the Chenault Chase mistake last season, making those calls wrong every time. But that's I don't really go through a reflection process. I think mentally, I kind of know what I did wrong, but I don't like make a point to think about it.
How do you think you've been getting better as a player annually? Like, what do you think has done to set you up for success? Then, do you think do you just outworking people, or what would you think is that catalyst?
Um, I definitely work as hard as anybody does on the free agent wires, and especially that second free agent run. I'm pretty confident that nothing is left behind when I'm done with that second free agent run. I'm confident that I have the best 20 players I could possibly have, given what's still there after the first run. And I think I think I'm good at setting my starting lineups. And I think my draft strategy, or lack thereof, benefits me because I do so many drafts. I'm able to see who good players are taking, and plan accordingly. Not in a way that I'm trying to snipe them and get guys before they pick, because oftentimes doing several at a time, I don't even know who's drafting next to me or what, except for the real big ones. But from the standpoint of improving my process of having the guys in the correct order. And then I also think that I understand tiers better than almost everybody, as far as when you should gravitate from one position to the next. I think I know where the cutoffs lie, at least later in the draft season. I usually do, where the cutoffs lie, where there's a dead spot now at that position. It's time to look elsewhere, because the next 5 guys are all about the same. So if I want to go back to that position, I should be able to get one of them next time. I think I excel at that part of drafting. So I think those are kind of the main things that allow me to separate from a lot of people.
Okay, I'm gonna do real quick random fire. Don't think much off, maybe 2 or 3 seconds. First player that comes to your name when I go through these camp battles. Okay, Gino Smith or Drew Lock?
Lock.
Okay,
Are you saying who I think's better or gonna win the job?
Yeah, or who's gonna win the job? Yeah.
Well, I think Smith's gonna win the job at this point. I think Lock's better.
Okay, Trubisky or any other quarterback on the roster?
Trubisky.
Okay, let's say Algier or Damian Williams.
Neither.
Okay, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Ronald Jones, the new toy Isaiah Pacheco, or anybody else?
I got to see Pacheco, but I believe Ronald Jones is better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but I think that it's going to be Edwards-Helaire and playing about 50 to 60%, and then somebody else, depending on how they use him, like Jones could take some of the early work, or McKinnon takes some of the receiving work, or outside chance Pacheco just takes over the whole deal and Edwards-Helaire backs him up. I have no idea, but that one's tricky.
Okay, Marlon Mack or Damian Pierce?
Again, I got to see more Pierce, but I'm not of the belief Mack's all that good, so probably Pierce.
Okay, Green Bay time. It's fun. Christian Watson, Sammy Watkins, Romeo Dobbs, Randall Cobb. Anybody else?
Um,
None of
I'll
the
take
above
the
is an option.
talent. I'll take the talent, Christian. But Lazard has a chance to be decent.
Okay, Chris Godwin over under weeks missed 4.5.
Well, that's a good line. I would say under 4.5 weeks missed.
Okay, Michael Gallup over under line. Let's say 3.5 weeks missed.
Over.
Jamison Williams over under 7.5.
Over.
Okay. All right. That's that. That was all my rapid fire questions. Any closing
Which ones do you
comments?
not agree with the most?
I lean Mac in the beginning of the season, just based upon NFL experience and prior to his Achilles injury, he was a top 20 back in 2 separate years. And had one of the best breakaway rates. Now that metric is definitely affected by Achilles injuries, and it may be hinder him in order to be more explosive. So we'll see how he looks. I think that's the big tell-all. But I'm not sold on either one of those guys at the position right now. I'd lean Mac though, and then I'd lean Damian over Algier. I just don't think Algier is that good, quite frankly. But again, that's just an ugly situation with the backfield and the team that it's on. Either of them may not be relevant, to be honest. But I do lean Damian over Algier as well.
That team does a horrible job with running backs.
They really, yeah, they got lucky with Freeman a couple of years, but that was about it. Any closing comments before I let you get out of here? Any advice to people who are looking to dip their toes?
No, I think we touched on most of the things that keep it simple and don't. I have a very simple approach for the most part drafting. You don't need to be a hero. It doesn't matter how you win. Just try to win. You don't have to win in cute ways.
Okay, everybody, that's Chad Schroeder, one of the best fantasy football players in the world. You can follow him on Twitter at ChadSCH23, and make sure you tag him whenever you draft, your running backs over your fifth wide receiver, so he can make sure to comment on those. But thank you, Chad, for joining us. We appreciate it here at the FFWC, and myself as well. It's always great to pick your brain. For those who are still here, there will be no grind time this week. I'm going to be flying to Canton, be at the FF Expo, so Jody and I might be doing a little impromptu recording just to say hi to everybody, but we're going to be at Canton drafting at the FF Expo for the Kings Classic. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a good